Right now, in your kitchen cabinet, sits a product born from one of the most successful psychological operations in corporate history. You think you bought it for the antioxidants, the morning ritual, or the simple comfort of a warm cup, but the reality is much darker. Behind every yellow label and every natural health claim is a century-old blueprint of market manipulation that fundamentally changed how we perceive biology. You weren't just sold a beverage. You were sold a solution to a health crisis that corporate giants like Lipton literally invented to prevent their own bankruptcy. This is the story of how a simple leaf was weaponized to exploit human fear, and how a handful of men became billionaires by convincing the world they were sick. To understand the scale of the deception, you have to look at the global market of the late 19th century. Tea was a commodity in crisis. The British Empire had flooded the world with more tea leaves than anyone knew what to do with. Prices were plummeting, and the industry was staring down a total collapse. In a traditional market, when there's too much supply, you lower the price. But Thomas Lipton wasn't a traditional merchant. He was a pioneer of the manufactured need. He realized that if you sell tea as a drink, you're competing on pennies. But if you sell tea as a life-saving medical necessity, the price is whatever you want it to be. The problem was that the public was perfectly healthy, and tea was just tea. To fix the market, they didn't need a better product, they needed a better disease. At the turn of the century, the tea industry began funding a series of pseudo-scientific campaigns that would make modern influencers blush. They didn't start by praising tea, they started by attacking the very concept of the modern lifestyle. They identified a set of vague, universal symptoms: fatigue, nervousness, indigestion, and what they called brain fag, and bundled them into a terrifying new epidemic. They called it the coffee heart, or modern neurasthenia. They flooded newspapers with terrifying accounts of people collapsing from the toxic effects of other beverages, while simultaneously positioning tea as the only natural antidote. This wasn't just advertising, it was the birth of the wellness industry as a weapon of war. Lipton's genius was in vertical integration, but his legacy is in psychological branding. He knew that the average consumer couldn't distinguish between a medical fact and a marketing slogan if the slogan was repeated enough times. He began using his massive wealth to plaster the phrase, "direct from the tea garden to the teapot," across every available surface. It sounded wholesome, but the subtext was clear. Everything else you're drinking is processed, dangerous, and corrupted. He created the illusion that the tea industry was the guardian of public health, even as his company worked behind the scenes to crush small farmers and consolidate power. By the time the public realized that the health crisis of the 1900s was just a marketing gimmick, Lipton had already become one of the wealthiest men on the planet, and the tea habit was hardwired into the global psyche. But the Lipton Lie didn't stop in the Edwardian era. It evolved. As science caught up and debunked the early nerve tonic claims, the industry shifted its focus to a new buzzword: tannins. In a brilliant move of doublethink, they spent decades alternating between claiming tannins were a dangerous toxin that only their specific processing could remove, and claiming they were a miracle nutrient that saved the body from decay. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. They funded university departments and independent researchers to produce studies that suspiciously always found a new reason why tea was the secret to longevity. They weren't just selling leaves, they were selling a stay of execution from death itself. The manipulation reached its peak when the industry began targeting the most vulnerable demographic: the working class. In an era of grueling factory work and malnutrition, tea was marketed as a liquid meal. They convinced millions of impoverished workers that a cup of tea could replace the nutrition of actual food. By rebranding caffeine-induced energy as vitality and restorative health, they helped create a workforce that was perpetually stimulated but biologically starving. This allowed industrial giants to keep wages low, as workers were content to survive on cheap tea and bread, fueled by the corporate promise that they were actually practicing good hygiene and modern health. The tea companies weren't just getting rich, they were helping to engineer the social structure of the industrial world. Think about the modern superfood craze. It is the direct descendant of the Lipton Lie. Every time you see a tea box promising to detox your liver or boost your metabolism, you are seeing the ghost of Thomas Lipton. These companies know that fear is the most effective sales tool in existence. They know that if they can make you feel slightly deficient, slightly toxic, or slightly off, you will reach for the yellow box as a security blanket. The health crisis isn't in your body. It's in the balance sheet of a multinational corporation. The antioxidant revolution of the 1990s was just the latest chapter. While the compounds exist, The claims that drinking a specific brand of processed tea bags can counteract a lifetime of poor environmental factors is a statistical stretch that would make a tobacco executive proud. They took a grain of truth and grew a mountain of deception. The most successful part of the lie is how invisible it has become. We no longer see the marketing as marketing. We see it as common sense. We've been conditioned for over a century to believe that tea is a medical intervention rather than a simple infusion of dried leaves. This conditioning allows companies to charge a premium for functional teas that are often just standard tea leaves with a few cents worth of dried herbs and a lot of expensive font work on the packaging. The profit margins are astronomical because the value isn't in the product, it's in the psychological relief you feel when you think you're taking care of yourself. Thomas Lipton's greatest invention wasn't the tea bag or the supply chain. It was the realization that you can colonize the human mind just as effectively as you can colonize a country. By owning the definition of health, he ensured that his company would never have to worry about a commodity slump again. As long as people are afraid of getting old, getting tired, or getting sick, there will be a market for the Lipton Lie. The industry has spent billions to ensure that when you feel a flicker of exhaustion, your first thought isn't, "I need sleep," but "I need tea." That reflex is the result of 130 years of meticulous, expensive, and ruthless market manipulation. We live in an age where information is everywhere, yet the core of the Lipton Lie remains unchallenged in the popular consciousness. We still buy into the romance of the tea garden, ignoring the reality of the massive industrial plantations and the marketing departments that treat our biology like a software exploit. The next time you walk down the beverage aisle, look past the vibrant colors and the promises of purity and zen. Look at the scale of the operation. Ask yourself why a simple leaf needs $1 billion advertising budget to convince you it's good for you. The crisis isn't real, the miracle is manufactured, and the only thing truly being cleansed is your bank account. The tea industry's transition from a luxury for the elite to a health necessity for the masses is the ultimate case study in how to manufacture a reality. They didn't just sell a product. They edited the human experience to include a gap that only they could fill. They turned a beverage into a religion and the supermarket into a cathedral of false hope. The Lipton Lie is a reminder that in the world of big business, a health crisis is often just a fancy word for a sales opportunity. They aren't looking out for your heart, they're looking at their dividends. And as long as we keep buying the cure, they'll keep inventing the disease. The leaf hasn't changed in thousands of years, but the stories they tell us about it have become the most expensive fiction in history. In the end, the most powerful ingredient in your cup isn't caffeine or polyphenols, it's the century of manipulation that convinced you that you couldn't live without it. That is the true cost of the tea in your cabinet, and it's a price we pay every single day, one sip at a time, while the architects of the lie continue to get rich off our manufactured fears.